Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from OnlinePhotographyTraining.com. Welcome to my free training on On1 Photo RAW 2019. In this episode, we're going to do some basic processing of an image in On1 Photo RAW 2019. Before I do that though, I want to cover one thing I forgot to cover in our last videos, and that is cataloged folders. If you look over on the top left-hand corner, you'll see there's a little section there called Catalog Folders, and that section is empty. You may notice when you're in the Browse module and you're navigating images, meaning you double-click on an image, it takes a second to render. It takes a second to kind of snap into focus. And as you go through your images, you're hitting the right arrow key as I am now, you'll notice that it just takes a second for the image to kind of snap into focus. Now in my case, my computer is fairly fast, so it's not that bad of a thing. It's not taking that long of a time. But if your computer's a little bit slow, or if your computer is doing some other processing in the background, and while that's processing, you're working on images in On1, you may notice that it takes a very long time for images to kind of snap into focus. So an advantage, or something you could do to alleviate that issue, is to catalog the folder. Typically, on a normal folder like we have here, when you select that image to display, for On1 to render the preview, it reads the preview JPEG that is embedded in the RAW file and then displays it on the screen, and that of course takes a little time. When you catalog the folder, what On1 does, it doesn't create another copy of the actual image, but it will create its own preview JPEG and store that JPEG in its cataloged area, which is kept with its system files, so that it could access that file much quicker and render it much faster. It also takes some metadata from the RAW file and catalogs that as well, so all that gets displayed much faster. So if you have some performance issues with On1, and this includes when you're actually processing an image and you're moving sliders, and it seems to take a second for the movement of the slider to appear on your preview on the screen, this could help cataloging a folder, and it's very easy to do. Now on the left-hand panel, you may remember I have on my system a Lightroom hard drive. It's just a hard drive I named Lightroom. And on that hard drive, I have two main folders, Lightroom RAW files, and then I have my On1 RAW files. And these are the images that in our previous videos I've installed, I imported into On1, and I showed how to to star rate them and all that stuff. In that On1 RAW files folder, I have a subfolder Winter, and then I have two subfolders to that, Hoyt Lake and South Park Lake. Right now we're on Hoyt Lake. Now let's say I want to catalog Hoyt Lake. You could do it one of two ways. You could just grab it and drag it up to where it says Catalog Folders. You could see it turns into a plus sign. But I've noticed that doesn't always seem to work. I don't know if that's a bug or if it's just something I'm doing wrong, but a way that always works is to just right-click on the folder you want to catalog and go down to Add to Cataloged Folders. And when you do that, you'll see it automatically gets added up here to Catalog Folders. Now it still is down here, and it's not duplicating the images, so it's not taking up any more disk space. It is taking up disk space, though, for the previews that it's creating, and JPEG previews aren't very large. So that way, now, theoretically, once this is done creating these JPEG previews, it will take some time. It's doing it in the background. When you click on an image, it will render much quicker. You can see that one did take a while, so it's not done yet creating those JPEG previews. But hopefully that will help any performance issues you may encounter with On1 if you catalog your folders. So let's process an image. These images I wasn't too enamored with. I actually just, as you may recall, just went out with my camera to take some pictures specifically to demonstrate how to import images into On1 Photo RAW 2019. Of course, we did that in a previous video. So I still want to kind of stay with these and process an image. So let me see if I could find something worthwhile to process. I had one that I kind of liked, and I don't know what I did with it. Let's see. Maybe this one here. Yeah, let's process this because it's a little crooked and we could do some stuff. And you can see how it took a second to render there. Yeah, so it, again, it will take a while for the program to create those JPEG previews and to index it so that it will render much faster. Now, of course, we're still in the Browse module, and to edit this, we have to go to the Edit module. So we're going to click right here. And over here on the right-hand panel, we have the tools in the Edit module to do some processing on this image. And you can see, by default, they're all rolled open. So I'm just going to close the bottom three down. So we're mainly working on this Tone and Color tab right now. This, of course, is the main tab for processing an image. This will really bring your image along most compared to the other tabs. Now, one thing I probably should say real quick, if you haven't watched my videos in the past, it will help you to know my kind of processing philosophy, which I borrowed from video processing. That is, in video production, when you create a video, typically the videographer will shoot the image or shoot the video as flat as possible. When you shoot an image very flat, it will allow you to have the most leeway to post-process it. You could do a lot to a flat image. But if you have a lot of contrast and color already baked into the image, it's harder then to process it the way you want it processed, because that's all kind of baked in. So typically, they'll shoot very flat, and then they'll do some of the basic processing at the beginning to make it even flatter. Then they use some tools in the videographer's toolbox to bring back contrast, color, and whatnot. Similarly, in the still photo world, I do similar. I shoot raw, so it tends to be a very flat image. And then I'll come in and I'll first do things that make the image look relatively flat. And things like when you go to the Tone and Color tab, you'll see that I specifically adjust a specific way. Now, first of all, at the top of the tab, you could see that we have camera profiles. And if we click on that drop down, you'll see that there's a number of On1 profiles. What On1 profiles are, what profiles are in general, it's kind of like a starting point. And it is a way to interpret and display contrast, color, and tone. And some offerings of contrast, color, and tone lend themselves best to specific types of images. For example, right now by default will be an On1 standard, and it's rendering the image with a very specific setting for contrast, color, and tone to give you what we're seeing. Now, if I go down and I hover over landscape, you'll see the image gets considerably brighter, and it seems to have a little more contrast. So the darker parts are a little darker, and the brighter parts are considerably brighter. That lends itself better to landscape images. Below that is portrait, and if this was a person, you'd see maybe their face would get the color tone and contrast of their face, or their skin tones would look better. Vivid, just a little more color, a little more contrast, adds a little more pop to your image. Then we have neutral, and this is very flat. Now below that, you'll see there's camera landscape, camera neutral. Every camera probably that's made nowadays that is a little more advanced will have these profiles built in, and you could actually set them in camera, and you'll see these will be camera specific. Now I shot this with a Nikon camera, and this specific Nikon camera has one that's called camera landscape, or it's just called landscape in the camera, called neutral, portrait, standard, vivid. Now again, these will be specific to your camera. If you shoot Canon or Sony or Pentax, you may have different settings here. They'll say different things. Fuji will have your Fuji film simulations will be listed here. So you can see how they render the image different. Now I mentioned my philosophy is to make the image as flat as possible early in my workflow. So I would probably go to On1 neutral for this image. So it even flattened the image a little more. Now below that we have the actual sliders. Now I think exposure's fine. Contrast I don't like to do early in my processing, remember? I want to make the image even a little flatter. So I'll go to highlights and I'll typically bring that down. So I'm bringing the brighter parts of the image more towards midtone. Then I'll go to the shadows. So I'll skip midtones for a second. I'll jump down to shadows and I push that up. So I'm bringing the darker parts of the image more towards midtones. So I'm making the image even flatter, right? Still not very good looking. Now I'll go to midtones and I'll kind of just, now I'll start to bring back in something that I might have processed away, meaning some of the either contrast, color, or tone of the image. So I kind of just do midtones by eye. I'll skip whites and blacks for now. And again, you know, this is just the way I do it. This isn't the way I wouldn't advocate everyone do it this way. Everyone's got to find their own way that they like or enjoy processing an image. But next I'll go to structure, and this is where we start to bring back some of our contrast. So I'll move that to the right and add some structure that's kind of a mid-tone contrast. Haze, if your image is hazy, you may find that if you move this to left, it will start to remove some of the haze. An image like this that doesn't have any haze, if I move it to the left, it just kind of brings back a little contrast. You can see a little more detail up in the sky. If I move it to the right, it's kind of induce some artificial haze. And I don't want that for this image. So I'm going to move that to the left. Now I'll set a white and black point by adjusting the whites and blacks. And this is where we're going to start really bringing in some more of the contrast. Now to do this, you could just eyeball it by moving the sliders. You could look up at the histogram up here and you can see there's 3 different boxes: navigation window, a levels window, which the histogram's in, or info, just info about the image. Make sure you're in the levels area so you could see the histogram, and then you could adjust whites or blacks to make the histogram shaped like you want it. What I usually do though is I make sure I'm in levels. This will only work if levels is being displayed here. And what I'll do is I'll go, let's say, to this white slider, and I'll hold the J key in on my keyboard and then click on the white slider, and as I move it to the right, you'll notice the image is getting brighter, 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 brighter. Now it didn't do it in this case, but for demonstration purposes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to return whites to its default position. Just for this demonstration, I'm going to turn exposure up, so we're making it super bright. Now I'm going to hold this J key in. I'm going to click on the whites slider and move it to the right, and eventually you'll see that red splotches are starting to appear. That means we're starting to clip our highlights. When you're clipping your highlights, that means it's pure white. There's not going to be any detail there at all. So if you print this, there won't be any ink laid down in that area at all. Usually, we don't like to clip highlights or clip shadows, more specifically clip whites or clip blacks that much. We like to try to retain some of the detail into the brightest parts of the image and into the darkest parts of the image. So usually, and this is the way I do it, I would then pull the whites back until all of the red is gone. You can see there's still a lot of red up in here, but I would pull that back. So that's how you would get a white point. Now in this case, I'm going to reset exposure to where it was. I'll hold that J key in, but I'm going to bring whites up quite a bit. Now you may have noticed as I'm holding this J key in, there's some blue there as well. See the little bit of blue? That is blacks. That means I'm clipping blacks right there. That is absolute black, no detail there. If I click on the black slider and move it to the left, you'll see we're getting more blue. Now usually I like to clip my blacks a little bit. I like to add a little bit more darker areas. I think it gives the image more visual depth. That's just my style. It's not the right way to do it. It's not the wrong way to do it. It's just my style. And I encourage you to kind of come up with your own style. That's something that works for you. Now once I do that, then by eye, I'll just go up to contrast and I'll move contrast to where I like it. And I don't really worry about whether I'm clipping or not. So that kind of gives me a base to, for the processing of the image. Now obviously I'm making this image very high key. I want this image to be very high key. So kind of looks pretty cool right there. Now below that, and if you have to excuse me a minute, my mouse is acting funky. There we go. Below that we have color. We're going to do more on this in a future video, but this has to do with your white balance. And there's several different ways you could adjust the white balance of your image. Now, this image, the white balance is fine. But what you can do is you could click on this little eyedropper and you'll see your cursor turns into a plus sign. What you do is you go over an area in your image that should be absolute white or absolute black, or most preferably middle gray, 18% gray. And you would click on that and it would give your image hopefully a nice rendering of white balance, a proper rendering. Now I could click on the snow down here and you can see how it warmed the image up a little bit. If you don't like it, click on that little dropper again and click somewhere, let's say that you should be middle gray, like right there. And it kind of gave us that same setting. So you could keep going. You clip on something that's black. See what that does. That cooled it off quite a bit. Let's go with that cool look just for the heck of it. So we have that look now. You also could just go to this drop down and you could hover over. There's as shot look. There's an auto look. This is On1 interpreting the image and giving you what they think the white balance should be. There's the daylight, cloudy, shade, tungsten, fluorescent. That's kind of crazy, right? Flash. And then our custom look that we just did. Or you could just come in and you could move the sliders to something that's appealing to you, the temperature and tint slider. So in this case, I think for this demonstration, well, let's just stay with as shot for now. And so you could, do it any way you'd like along those lines. Now, we have saturation and vibrance. They all, of course, affect color. Saturation affects every single pixel in the image. So if you bring it all the way down, you'll have a black and white image. On the other hand, vibrance doesn't affect every single pixel. You see if I bring it down, there's still some color in there. What vibrance, or the main difference between these two, there's actually two main differences. Well, three if you count that saturation affects every pixel and vibrance doesn't affect every pixel. But one main difference is if you bring saturation up, if a color is already saturated, it will oversaturate the color. On the other hand, if you bring vibrance up and a color is already saturated, it will tend not to oversaturate that color. It will just bring the colors to saturation, but not oversaturate them. The other difference between these two sliders has to do with skin tone. Vibrance does not affect reds and pinks as much. So if you have an image, a portrait, you have even a landscape image that has people in it, and you want their skin tone to register properly, you'll be probably better off moving the vibrance slider. Now in this case, there's no person in this image, so I'm going to turn vibrance, or I'm going to turn saturation up. So we're affecting every single pixel, and you can see as I move it to the right, it really gets super colorful. Now, vibrance, even if you move that and there's a person in the image, sometimes the skin will still get affected a little more. And since On1 could recognize faces, you could click this little checkbox and it will reduce any vibrance furthermore on the skin. So that will help you there. Now, when you're adjusting saturation or vibrance, you may find that you're tinting the whites either, like a warmer color, a cooler color, or you're tinting the blacks a color or the shadows. And what you could do then is you could bring back the purity of your highlights or shadows with these two sliders. So as you move it to the right, it basically, just pulls the color out of, in this case, highlights. If you move shadows to the right, it will pull the color out of the shadows. So that's what those two sliders do. Now, before I go any further, as I look at the image, I could see I have a little sensor spot. I think actually that is like, it was snowing actually lightly. You can't see it in the image, but there's a little spot there. Also, the image is a little crooked. So let's fix that. Let's fix the spot first. So we're going to go over here and we're going to go to this fix icon right there. We'll click on that. You can see it's a little eraser. And our cursor turns into this big circle. And you can see up above, we have some specific tools. We're on the eraser tool. Next to that is a retouch brush tool. Then we have a clone stamp tool. And then we have the size of the actual brush. And then this little gear there, if you click on that, if you're using a Wacom tablet or some type of tablet, the pressure of your pen on the tablet could adjust the size of the brush. Now in this case, I mentioned before, I'm using a mouse, so that isn't applicable. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the retouch brush, and there's the attributes for the brush now. We have the size, and you could adjust it by clicking there and moving this little slider. Or you could just hover over where it says size, and you can see the cursor turns into that horizontal arrow. And that's called a scrubby slider. And if you click with the left mouse button and you go left or right, you'll adjust the size of the brush that way. It's usually the way I like to do it. The other way you could do it is you could just use the bracket keys on your keyboard. The left bracket key makes that brush smaller, the right bracket key larger. We could feather it. Usually feathering helps it blend better. So I'm going to keep it around 50. It's good feathering. The opacity, I'm going to keep opacity at 100 because I want to completely eliminate this spot. I don't want to just fade the spot out. So I'm going to get a brush that is just a little bit bigger than that spot and click once, and it will take a second, and you can see it got rid of it. And another little very faint one right there. And I would go through, zoom in. Since we're doing the video, I'm not going to do that, but I would zoom in and carefully look through, especially the sky area, because that's where the spots will be most readily seen. So when you're done with the tool, you could go back to the view function down here, the zoom tool. So just click there. You can hit the Z key on your keyboard. Now I did mention that the image seems to be slightly crooked. To straighten it, go to the crop tool right here. You can see then we get this rule of thirds overlay, and we'll talk more about overlays in a future video. And up above we have these tool attributes for the crop tool. And we're in the freeform tool now. Now we're not really gonna though do any cropping of the image per se. I just want to straighten the image. So there's a couple different ways we could do that. One is if you just come outside the image a little bit, you'll notice that the cursor turns into this like circle thing. And I don't know if this actually works on Windows computers, but if you have a Windows machine and this isn't working, I had reports that at least an early version of On1 Photo RAW 2018, this didn't work on Windows machines. But I'm not sure if they fixed it since I use Mac. But you could click here, and you could click down with the left mouse button, and then you could kind of just drag the image to straighten it by eye. You can see that a tight grid, though, appears that helps you straighten the image. So that would help. If you're satisfied with that, you could click Apply. In this case, let's click Reset. Another way you could straighten the image is with the Level tool. It's right here. Click on that. You can see that's active, and your cursor turns into the Level tool. Find something that should be perfectly horizontal in the scene or something that should be perfectly vertical in the scene. Now in this case, I do have kind of the roof of the building here, and there's some lines. And let's say I just click there and draw across. Hold that left mouse button in and draw across and along that horizontal line, and hopefully it'll straighten the image. Now I didn't do it too good of a job. You can see it still seems a little crooked. So I'm going to do it more by eye. Come off the image to the right and kind of just do it by eye like that. And then let's say that's good enough. I'd probably fuss with it a lot more because I'm really fussy about getting a straight image. But for this video, let's click Apply. So now we have this nice straight image. So we're done straightening the image. We got rid of a couple spots. We did the Tone and Color tab. Next is the Details tab. Tell you the truth, typically I like to do details in the Effects module. There's tools and filters in the Effects module that will help me adjust to make the image look very sharp and to get rid of noise. And I prefer to do it there. because there's masking. You could do some masking there, so you could apply it to very specific parts of your image. But in this case, if I was in a hurry, I'd probably just pick a preset like low. It adds a little bit of sharpening and adds a little bit of luminance and color noise reduction. Just remember there's a little drop down here that usually will offer some more of these presets for that tab. We have the high, low, print, and screen. If you're going to print the image, usually it sharpens it a little more. If you're going to share it online, use screen, and it usually will give you enough sharpening and noise reduction for sharing it online where people would be viewing it on a computer monitor. So again, we'll go into more detail on details in future episodes, and we'll do more details on lens corrections as well. You can see it automatically found that I shot this with the Nikon 24-70 lens, so that's all set. We'll go into more detail later. And transform, we're going to go into a lot of detail on this in a future episode. Especially when you're shooting architecture, you'll see buildings look like they're falling backwards. Buildings on the edges look like they're tilted in, and transform tool will help you fix that. What I do want to do quickly is I want to just go to effects, and we could add different filters. I mentioned there's filters. If we go to add filters, you can see there's all these different filters, and if you hover over a filter, let's say hover over dynamic contrast, it'll give an example of dynamic contrast over here. In this case, I'm hovering over skin retouching, and it gives an example image, and then it will talk about exactly what that filter does. And I mentioned that I prefer coming over here to do noise reduction and sharpening because of masking. You can see there's the noise reduction, and over here is sharpening, and I prefer to do it here. So we're going to be going into a lot more depth in a future video on a lot of these filters. And again, in this video, it's a little bit more of an overview. But what I want to do is talk about presets. A lot of times we could just use a preset, especially an effects preset, adjust our image in the develop module to get it kind of like we want, then go over here and use a preset. There's hundreds of presets in On1 Photo RAW 2019. You can see there's landscape. If I click on that, you can see it'll give you an example of your image with that specific preset rendered, like landscape pop cool. If I click on that, it will then put the filters over here that pertain to this this preset that's in the effects module. And I'm going to reset it. I don't really care for that, so it's just getting rid of those. But there is one that I specifically want to do that is one that I sell. It's in third-party presets, Anthony M's effects presets. And the one that I'm interested in, and by the way, if you want to see a larger rendering of each of these images, if you go over here, you'll see there's little 4 bricks. If you click on that, you'll see all the each of the presets that are in that folder rendered a little larger, so you could get a better idea of what you like. And there's one I like, winter, that I usually like, and we'll enter that. And you can see that gave it a really cool tone. And, you know, I don't know. I thought maybe I'd like it better than I do. But let's just keep looking. Maybe spring has sprung. Let's see what that one looks like. All right, let's go with that. You can see it added all these filters over here for this specific image, for that preset. And again, there's hundreds of presets. Now, those are ones I sell, but I mean, there's hundreds that come with On1 Photo RAW 2019. So you'll have a lot of presets to choose from. Typically, you could come in, add a preset, then you could kind of micro adjust these, better suit your personality and something you're trying to you do with the image. Or you could just come in, and we'll do this in future videos, where we're going to add filter by filter and process the image. So I kind of like this. I think it's okay. There's the vignette. I think I want it a little larger, so I'm going to pull it in from the corners a little more, so it's a little darker on the edges. So I think that's it. And let's say I'm done. I'm done with the image. Now I could just go back to the browse module, and I could pick another image to process, hit grid, and I could go from here. So that is, you know, in a nutshell, how I go about processing an image in On1 Photo RAW 2019. Thank you for watching my free video training on On1 Photo RAW 2019. Please do me a favor and like and share this video. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And in the description below this video, you'll see ways that you could help me keep making free photography how-to videos. Finally, visit my website, onlinephotographytraining.com. There, you'll find over 900 videos and articles to help you with your photography. And of course, they're all free. Thank you.